everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing week 22 of my 2020 reads. This week I finished some really great books, and I NFN'd one book, plus I want to talk to you about some social justice resources in case you're interested. So first, let me start with the books that I finished this week, beginning with Indianish, which is a cookbook by Priya Krishna, written together with her mother, Ritu Krishna. So if you're not familiar, Priya is one of the contributors to the Bon Appetit YouTube channel. I'll link a playlist of the videos that she's in below. And she does this sort of Indian-ish cooking, which is very much Indian home cooking, kind of inspired by living in the US. And so Sush and I have been watching Bon Appetit and just being very much in the cooking mood during quarantine and loved some of the recipes that we heard her talking about. So we decided to get her cookbook and I read through it. I don't usually read through cookbooks, but this one I read all the way through. It's really sweet, just kind of talking about a lot of her experiences with her family, growing up, with Indian food, her relationship to it, but also just tons of really accessible recipes that are sort of Indian-ish, you know? They're based on kind of an idea of Indian food, but modified for working in the US, and absolutely loved these recipes. Sush and I made quite a few of them this week. Our absolute favorites are the roti pizza and the saag feta and the cauliflower with pea chutney. We also made some of the other recipes, although they're not quite as favorite. I really recommend at least checking out the YouTube channel and seeing some of those recipes. Roti pizza can be made with like flour tortillas if you have them. So that's a very high recommendation from me. Some of the recipes are maybe not as good as the other ones. We made, for example, a chana recipe, which is kind of like a chickpea recipe, and I would say that that flavor profile wasn't as favorite as kind of other recipes that I've had for that, but even so, I just really liked so much of this book, so many of the recipes, and they're just so accessible. It's not demanding a ton of time or skill to make these work, so I really loved that. I can't wait to try even more of the recipes. I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars, and I recommend picking it up. Next, I read a couple of books that fit with my May priority of Asian heritage, starting with The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. This is a pretty famous book from the 80s that is literary fiction, and I loved it. I had previously read Never Let Me Go by Ishiguro and really enjoyed that one. This one is even better. I just love the way that Ishiguro writes. It's just this very slow, very emotional but calm journey that unravels as you go. So this story is about a butler, and he's taking a little bit of a road trip in the 1950s and reflecting back upon his career, especially sort of in his heyday in the 1920s and 1930s. And this book is so much about explorations of his life and the value of his life, the meaning that he made in his life, especially on things like professionalism and dignity and loyalty, and sort of what he gets out of being a butler, and really kind of reflecting on the choices that he's made. It is very, very much a contemplative novel, and one that's all about this sort of inner reflection. I really loved it though. If you're looking for, you know, a strong plot or fast-paced action, this is not going to be it. But if you really like to just sit with a character as they think through their life, this is so beautiful. I also really liked that it addressed a lot of really interesting topics, and it did so with a little bit of a unreliable narrator type of strategy, because this butler is somebody who is not very open to emotions, even with himself. And because a lot of this is memories from 20, 30 years ago, sometimes he talks about a memory, and then as you go forward, you learn a little bit more context for it, or a little bit of a different way of seeing it. And it's just so beautiful to see those layers of his personality and his life unfold as you go. I just really loved the process of reading this. I'd do a separate review for this almost, except that it's like a well-known classic, so nobody needs me to talk about this one, but I really loved it, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. And the last book that I finished this week was The Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nghi. This is a book that I actually did do a standalone review for, so that'll be up later this week if you're interested. And I absolutely loved this. It's a brand new novella out from Tor.com, and it's just about 110 pages, but it packs such a punch. This story is so epic. It has so much world building and character development and just beauty and mythology. It is sort of an Asian mythology inspired fantasy world, maybe low fantasy, that really focuses a lot on political intrigue. In the story, we are hearing the memories of a handmaiden of an empress, and she's telling the story of how that empress came from the north to the southern empire to marry the emperor, bear him a son, and then was exiled and basically robbed of all power, except she wasn't quite ready to be robbed of all power. I just loved this. It was such a feminist take, really beautiful atmosphere, and just I fell in love with all of the characters so quickly. I'm so impressed when an author in so few pages can make me care so deeply. I cried about, I don't know, 100 times in this book. It was so moving. I really enjoyed this story. If you want to know more, check out my review later this week. But if you're at all interested in this, please pick it up. It is so wonderful. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. So those are all of the books that I finished this week, but I did NFN, or Not For Now, one book, which was Front Desk by Kelly Yang. So this book actually I was really enjoying. It is a contemporary middle grade, or I guess slightly historical fiction because it's set in the 1990s. And it is about a little girl whose family has immigrated from China to the US, but they're struggling to find jobs. And her parents find a job working as motel managers. And they're kind of overworked and overwhelmed. And so she's helping out at the front desk. It's super sweet. It has a lot of really interesting issues that it addresses, especially about exploitation of immigrant labor. However, I NFN'd this at 13% because it did something that I'd sort of forgotten I have such a huge issue with, which is the amount of secondhand embarrassment that you feel for this character is just overwhelming, and I really struggle with that. The main character is so earnest and so much wants to help out, and she keeps trying to help out except making mistakes, things that go pretty wrong. And as the reader, you see her deciding to help out in some way, and you think, oh no, don't do that, that's not going to turn out well, and then it doesn't turn out well. And just that feeling of waiting for things to not turn out well was so hard for me to handle. So I found that I just couldn't continue, but I did really like this story, so maybe at some point in the future I'll feel brave enough that I can handle that kind of level of just embarrassment for what the character is going through. But for now, I had to set it aside. Okay, so those are all of the books that I read this week. If you've read any of those, I would love to hear your thoughts on them, anything that you have to recommend to me, any comments, anything like that, go ahead and leave them below. And I did want to do one other thing, which was just given sort of everything that's been going on in the past couple of weeks in the news, things like Amy Cooper and Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, I did want to just kind of do a little bit of a shout out for a couple of resources. So if you're somebody who's been watching all of this, and if you're at all affected by it, I am so sorry. That is so awful and just really heart-wrenching. If you're somebody who's been watching what's going on and is a little confused by it though, I wanted to offer just a couple of links to resources. So down in the description box below, I have a couple of things linked that I wanted to tell you about. So first, if you're somebody who has watched what happened, especially with George Floyd and the riots and protests and everything that's been happening in Minnesota and are not really understanding why everything has led to such kind of extreme reactions, I really want to recommend the book The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. That really explains a lot of the systemic injustice in the criminal justice system. And so I think that that'll help provide a lot of context for understanding why people are so upset and why that's leading to riots. If you're somebody who just wants to read more broadly, kind of expose yourself to more information about how to be a better ally, about anti-racism, I'll link below a Google Doc which has a ton of resources, all sorts of things like books and films and podcasts and websites and all sorts of things of how to be better anti-racist ally for Black people when you're a white person. So I think that that's a really good resource list. Another thing that I want to link below is there's a lot of great organizations out there, but there is one called Reclaim the Block. And that is a Minneapolis-based nonprofit organization that really focuses on community solutions to safety that are not policing. So things like providing resources and health and education and support for communities and kind of defunding police. So that's what they work on. And you can donate to that organization, or you can just, like they have a petition to sign for kind of trying to convince Minnesota and Minneapolis to defund policing, since that's very difficult and dangerous for Black lives. So that's a great organization to check out. And then one other thing that I wanted to link was a video that I did last year with shout outs for a couple of different booktubers who I think really focus on social justice issues. I know that every person on that list has strongly influenced me, both in simply understanding things better through hearing their analysis, as well as getting so many ideas of books that I wanted to read and just lots of resources for social justice. So if you're interested and you want to follow more booktubers who talk about social justice issues, go ahead and check out that shout out video. I will link it below and you can get some other ideas. Again, this is definitely a really difficult and awful thing that is going on with all of this issue of Black Lives Matter and sort of police brutality and everything. And the worst part is that it's not new. It's something that is very much ongoing, very systemic, and very intentional in a lot of ways. So I think it's really great if you can check out more resources or support Black Lives Matter in any way that you can. So I just wanted to leave those resources down for you below.